Hello all, and welcome to listen to the Education and Psychology for Everyone podcast. My name is Katja Upadyaya, and I will be your host today when we are discussing a very important topic, values. So if we think about values, values are important because they touch each and every one of us. And oftentimes we make decisions according to our values, even without thinking about them. So Dr. Florencia Sortheix has been doing research on values for several years, and today she is visiting our podcast, and she will tell us more about values and recent research findings. Welcome, Dr. Sortheix, to Education and Psychology for Everyone.
Thank you, Katja. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So I think we can start from the beginning. Could you tell us, what are values? How would you define them?
Yes, sure. So I started to be interested in the topic of values for my PhD, so before coming to Finland. And then I contacted Professor Klaus Helkama, who was actually one of the pioneers who helped Salomon Schwartz develop his theory. So that's one of the most widely used theories on values. And from there I can come to the definition that values are broad goals that serve us as guidelines, actually. So they guide our behavior, and they also provide the motivation for the behavior. They also have a kind of evaluative component. So you judge things and people based on your values. Whether something is good or interesting, it will depend on what things are most important to you.
Right. And so we know already that there are quite many kinds of values, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us something about the kinds of values that exist?
That exist.
Or that we have.
Or I will talk from Schwartz's theory. Mm-hmm. So Schwartz tested his theory in almost, I think, 70 countries of the world. It's a massive amount of work and cross-cultural research to find out which values are common. So this is not to say these are all the values that exist, but the values that we can measure more or less reliable across countries and cultures. And these are 10 values. I will tell you the higher dimensions so that we don't have time to go over each of the 10 values. Broadly, these values reflect the opposition between self-transcendence, which is caring for other people, the well-being of close people, and also the well-being of the broader society and the natural environment. So transcending self-interest versus self-enhancement values. We concern personal interests such as having power, having money, wealth, resources, showing achievements. And the other dimension opposes openness to change versus conservation values. Openness to change are about novelty seeking, being self-directing, choosing your own goals, experiencing new things, stimulating events. You like that change. And conservation values are people for whom it's important to keep the status quo, keep things as they are, find security, respect the traditions, respecting the norms. And why this opposition that I'm telling you is actually because people, when you ask them to rate their values, if you tend to consider that openness to change values are important, you tend to consider that conservation are not important. So this kind of opposition is present empirically in what people respond. Another interesting thing is that across all samples and people, generally people value more self-transcendence and openness to change values than the self-enhancement and conservation values.
So those values are seen kind of like the most important across the world?
Yes, there are differences, but in general it's interesting to see that there is kind of a pan-cultural agreement that
right.
These values tend to be more, yes.
And you also mentioned these are kind of like the main topics of values. So are there kind of like some smaller kinds of values underneath them, or
yes,
all kinds?
So these are the larger dimensions, and the smaller values. Actually, Schwartz developed his theory in 1992 and proposed 10 values, and then it was extended, and even more smaller values were tested, and the structure works. And values are organized in a structure of these oppositions of values, which are more important and less important. And interestingly, when you correlate values with other variables, they generally correlate positively with some values and negatively with the opposing values. So if something would correlate positively with self-esteem. But going back to your question, the 10 values are benevolence and universalism are the self-transcendence, and power and achievement are self-enhancement values. And for the openness to change, you have self-direction, so choosing on goals, stimulation, and hedonism, which is about enjoying life. And in the conservation values, you have traditions, respecting the traditional institutions and the way society works, conformity, which is about obeying the norms and rules, and security.
Right.
So those would be the 10 smaller values.
So security, how would you define it?
Security is the importance of personal and national security.
So does it also include kind of like stable income?
No, it doesn't say anything about income.
Okay.
But if you want that, I can tell you what happened. Well, I am maybe moving fast forward, but I tell you that one classification is about the self or the self-focus or other people focus. And another broader kind of underlying motivation is the growth motivations or the anxiety and self-protection motivation. So security values, also with the power achievement values, are anxiety defending motivation. So their main goal is to protect the self.
Okay.
So you would think that if you don't have money, then you increase. It is not that you think. Also, research finding shows that if you don't have money or you live in poorer countries, then you tend to give more importance to what you don't have, which is security, probably, money and possession. If you live in a highly developed countries in Finland, then people in general ascribe more importance to the anxiety-free, so to the growth values, which are self-enhancement, the caring for the environment, for people.
So I'm kind of like hearing that it kind of like matters also in what kind of society you live in, and that what kind of values you then have. So it kind of like what is your situation also defines your values a little bit, at least.
It certainly allows you to focus more on to give more importance to the growth values when you don't feel that you are in danger, right, or in a scarce environment.
Right. So then it might be also a little bit, I don't know, this is just a thought, but it could be something similar also kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of values.
Yes, exactly.
In a way. So when the basic needs are fulfilled, you move on, right?
Exactly. And that's the Maslow's needs is actually also at the basis of this thinking of growth and protection values.
Right.
So the protection values are about the basic needs, exactly as you said, and the growth values are self-actualization. And that leads to what in my research I said, how are values linked to well-being? And it's partly it's what we would expect about the growth and anxiety-free. So those values related to growth, to satisfying the higher needs of self-actualization and developing yourself as a person, are more connected to benevolence, universalism, and also openness to change. And these values are positively related to your well-being. While if you focus on more on conservation or especially on self-enhancement, on power and achievement, then your well-being is undermined. There is actually the literature started by examining the role of power as a proxy for materialism. No? And already in 1993, a lot of research was done on the pervasive effects of the consumer culture on your well-being. And what happens when you think that you value these possessions and material, and it correlates impressively, consistently with lower well-being, higher anxiety. So are you saying like if the materialistic values are very high, your well-being might not be so high? Yes.
Yeah. That's very interesting. And that's really a good seed for thought, I think, in the modern world.
Yes.
And now we have so many things and so much material that is easily available.
And so much messages.
Yeah.
So there is other research by Elga Dietmar and colleagues, which was so interesting about the messages that youth and especially women are receiving. And how it so damages for their self-image. And because people, that's when we were walking here, you told me about the origins of value. And I told you that, yes, values are your inner compass. So they are telling you from inside what should be important to you. When you weigh the consequences of any choice that you will make, you say, okay, it's not what I care, but it's what do I care more? Because we care about many things at the same time. But what will I care a bit more? So it's the priority of values which determine your behavior. I got a promotion. We need to move to another side of the world. What do I care more? Benevolence, or taking care of my family, or achievement, progressing in my career? And then you decide, regarding many, many other aspects, but that's at the core of the decision.
Right.
And how our values are socialized very early on. So that takes us also to where do you live, what values you will value.
Yeah.
So they actually also thought as the intersection between the individual and society. So we learn our values very early on from our family, from our society, neighborhood, from the teachers. And then they are quite stable, actually, through life and guiding us through many choices. And one part of my research has been on values and the well-being, but the other part is on how values apply to the work context, or how they guide your career choices.
So can you really teach values actively to children or students, or how would you do it?
Yes, you can actually we do teach values. Because at the university or in any school or learning environment, we want people to think for themselves. That's self-direction.
Right.
To be curious, to look for different options to do things. That's stimulation values. So the openness to change values are really reinforced by education.
Right.
But also nowadays we want more and more to teach universalism. How are we going to maintain the society like a well-functioning and integrated society which does not destroy the environment? No, I think it's part of also the University of Helsinki. One of the core values now is sustainability, which is all about universalism and how can we keep this value and transmit this value.
Right.
Through education, through role modeling, of course, but also through books, stories, anecdotes. Values, when we talk about values of a group, we talk about cultural values or group values. Then they are seen in also in the heroes that we have. Who are the role models and that we give the children, and those kind of things are transmitting values.
Right. Oh, that's very interesting. But then if we go a little bit back for concerning the culture, you mentioned that these values are seen across the cultures and across the world. But then I was wondering if there are any cultural differences in these values. We touched that topic a little bit, but in general, are they? What kind of findings there are?
Yes. So when you aggregate the values of a country like Finland, you find a very clear map of the world. One work is done by Schwartz. So following the Schwartz values, then we have that. It changes a bit the names of the values because it's aggregated and it changes the value structure, but it's about egalitarianism. So Finland and all the Nordic countries are very high on egalitarianism and autonomy, intellectual autonomy, thinking by their own. And you can see those in the educational system because egalitarianism will oppose the value of hierarchy. Hierarchy would be that there is very much respect for the professor, and you never refer to a professor by their name or anything like that. And this is very high in Confucian in Asian countries, for example, also in African countries. Latin America is a bit in the middle of this hierarchy and egalitarianism. And then embeddedness is also very high in more Asian countries, and also former, here we have Eastern European countries are a bit higher, more on this embeddedness and collectivistic values, which are related to conservation values.
Right. And then also in the Nordic countries and also here in Finland, we value things like nature and kind of like purity of nature a lot. Where would you relate That kind of
because
value.
no, it's I forgot. It's not only about egalitarianism, but it's harmony is a cultural value.
Right.
Harmony with nature, an inner peace. Imagine it's an item that loads into harmony. Finland, of course, is the highest one of the highest in harmony. And the country's score on harmony predicts their footprint actually. How much this country, some sustainability outcomes, right? And you can see when I was teaching a course that was called the Introduction to Finnish Culture and Society.
Yes.
So I said, where do you see the harmony? And we were looking for examples together, and one was, for example, in laws here, you have the law of the every man's right.
Yeah.
That's impressive because that shows that the nature is for everyone to enjoy, that you cannot put a fence preventing people to go to the sea. And that doesn't exist. In other countries, you live by the sea, you put a huge fence so that you have it for yourself. And So that shows that this has been happening in history for a long time, this harmony and the value of nature for all, because it has to do with for everyone. Then the inner peace and the also being in nature with the mökki, the culture of being just alone in your mökki and just you don't want anyone around, just you and nature, right?
Yeah.
And then in current practices, like for example, the government built the bana. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's this lane for bikes. They could have made a shopping mall, but they built the bana, and probably citizens had a saying there.
Right.
So we want to transport also in something that is more not contaminating, respecting nature, and
right. Oh, that's very interesting when you talk about it, and also about harmony. Maybe that explains why Finland is also ranking so high in the happiness. After year, we are always at the top of the happiest country in the world. So I'm wondering if the harmony has something to do with it, because it seems that we have also maybe like a really good work-life balance compared to many other countries.
Yes.
So maybe that also reflects the values over here.
Yes, I'm not now remembering very well about research, but I'm sure it does. At least, of course, if you think about universalism, that when it's high and you are in a country which allows you to kind of live in line with your universalism values, then you have the highest well-being.
Right.
That was one finding of my research, that if you live in a highly developed country and you value universalism, it's positive for your well-being. But if you live in a low developed country and you value universalism, you are unhappy.
Right.
Because what we theorize is that you cannot live up to your values, right? You feel so many frustrations of inequality, of lack of contact with nature, and lack of opportunities for everyone, etc.
So there has to be kind of like a fit between the environment
also a
and your
bit,
values.
yes.
Yeah.
So I think that what we find in Finland and in the Nordic, that they all score among the highest in happiness, is the match that people with the, I call it the good value. Can we call it the good values?
Yeah.
But with the universally harmony values and benevolence values, like egalitarian, can live and have societies that fit these values, then then they score the happiest.
Right. Well, if you think about value research, is there some values that are kind of like lacking here in Finland? Such as like respect to elders, it's not maybe as strong as in some other countries, or
I don't know if lacking, but of course the conservation values are much lower, and maybe they also have the positive side. Conservation values are about the traditional institutions and respecting the status quo. It doesn't mean that no one in Finland values them.
Right.
It's we always have to remember that there are different people in every country. So even when we talk about the general idea of what values are valued in Finland, is absolutely not everyone.
Right.
The difference are larger inside Finland, actually, that if you compare Finland with other countries. But just when we aggregate, we see these expressions of values at the group level. And maybe societies that have a bit higher these more collective and conservative values are a bit more oriented towards sharing your time with groups at the expense of personal freedom.
Right.
And maybe this trade-off in Finland is not happening so much, that maybe there is so much emphasis on individualism that those values suffer a bit more in a way.
Right.
And yes, there are consequences. There are groups that are suffering a lot of loneliness.
Right. Because then I'm kind of like wondering, is there some sort of like a value balance that would be the best sort of? Can we find it, or does it even exist? Or can there be like many kinds of combinations that
No,
kind of
I
like
think
work?
that it's if we go back to the individuals, each person has its own balance, and there are probably moments in life where different values will give you the most happiness,
right?
And it will it will change, but I think the congruence again with what you value and what you do is important, and that's at the individual level, and it's not a balance. It's what you choose and how you organize your life to match what you value.
Right. And then you said something about values being quite stable, like that they kind of like start developing early on in your life. But is it possible to change values, or if you would want to change them, or do they change? Are there some indicators that push them to change, or what do you think?
I'm thinking, the first thought that I have is that values are do change a little bit, and for at least temporarily when there is a crisis. And there has been a lot of research now. I did one study actually with Schwartz also, himself and others, about the economic recession in 2008. So now we can think that probably something similar is happening nowadays. And in 2008, there was a big bump in values, because those self-protection values, the anxiety protection values, increased. So power, achievement, and also security increased in importance for young people. So we took actually people from 18 to 35 years old from all European countries. Right. And this increase was much higher in less socioeconomic developed countries. And it was a bit smaller in countries which have a larger welfare system like Finland. Right. But still it was. And it lasted at least 1 or 2 rounds, because we use European Social Survey data. So it lasted some years. And that has consequences, because we know that those values in general decrease well-being, increase anxiety. These values are also related to negative attitudes towards out-group members, towards immigrants, are positive related to voting right-wing governments. So I think that we are seeing something in those lines. But then these values came back to normality, so it was temporary. And in longitudinal studies with individual people, because that was a cross-time series, we see that values change very little. So even though you have something, they may be a small change, but then you get back to what your previous levels, and they guide you very stable. It's called self-selection. So the individual, for example, who values certain things, self-select themselves to certain occupations.
But then crises like the climate change, which is going on now, do you think it has more lasting effect on values?
The climate change is kind of different, because it doesn't not only affect our resources or our security. No, it's wider. So it affects more your universalism values are challenged.
Right.
And so we cannot kind of test the effect, because this has been happening for a long time. Now we are more and more every year more aware, but the information has been there since the 70s, I think. Yes.
Right. And
it's not a shock. So when there is a shock, it's easy to see the effect. But this long time, I hope that actually talking about the environment and kind of bringing the importance of these values to awareness increase the importance of protecting.
Right. And then at the individual level, it's very interesting to think that we usually think that we have our own values. Some things are important for us, some are not. But then that's also the reflection of the society and what's going around you, right? So it's not just, it's actually not very individual at all. Like it's all the situation, everything affects how you think. And I think that's a very important message too. So we are kind of like part of the bigger picture,
Yes.
what's going on. Yeah.
And I think that's a very important message for educators to also teach young people, like to get in touch with their values. Because values can be kind of brought to awareness, reflect on their values, and counteract a bit also so much messages that we have. We have all the consumerist campaigns, of course, trying to get our attention on what we should want, how we should live our lives, how women should look like. Then we have the political also disputes here and there, what we should value or not value. So there are a lot of conflicting views that can be very confusing, I guess, for youth.
Yeah, a lot of messages coming from each direction. Right, so maybe should we then kind of like teach young people sort of like inner strength, or kind of like, don't follow everything?
I think that reflecting on your own values give you a lot of inner strength, yes.
Right.
But it can be difficult, of course, because then some people, especially young people, can get confused. Is it what I value or what others value? So this differentiation of the self and other expectation is part of the development. But reflecting on values can help.
And then I know you already mentioned some research findings, but are there some other research findings that you had in your own career that you would want to share with us? I know you have done a lot of research from kind of like different perspectives or also on values.
Yes, so I have mostly talked now about general values and well-being and how the context might influence also which values. And then another part of my research has studied values in the work context. And work values or career values are the type of things that you consider important to have or to do in your job or in your future job. And that leads your career selection. And then we talk about a bit different values, because it can also be about novelty, new things, but also how important it is for you to have management tasks, innovation in the work, how important it is to have good social relationships with coworkers, the work-life balance value, etc. And there we have studied, these values predict some career choices like entrepreneurship or leadership. But one important takeaway message for all is that when there were some values that are called, this is following more the research on by Salem Mortimer and Monica Kirkpatrick Johnson from the US. When there is this intrinsic work values, is I want this job because I find it interesting, I really like it, it's valuable, it's worth it itself for me. When you have this intrinsic appreciation of the choice that you're making, then this predicts your work engagement even 4 or 6 years afterwards. So it has kind of this very protective effect.
Right.
And another, if we think about another predictor of being work engaged and preventing you from being burnout, is the person's job fit. So this comes from Maslow's areas of work life. So one very important predictor is how much your values align with your organizational values. And then again, so for older students who are thinking about what the career choices, thinking about really what is what I value and where will I work. And either an alignment or not, when there is a choice, no? Because sometimes, but that's a very important step, because otherwise, when you feel this misfit, it generates so much anxiety, and you are kind of betraying yourself.
Right. That's a very important message for all the students who are entering to the work life. Yeah.
And also, and also for workplaces, for example, in teacher education. I remember I was teaching a course, and the students were asking, why do young kindergarten teachers leave their workplace? Because apparently there is a huge problem, not only that there are not enough, but also that those who go there early on quit. And when they were interviewing people, they said it's the lack of value fit. because we cannot work in line with our values.
Right.
So also, not that the workplace wouldn't have these values, but if there are constraints, like a lot of bad distribution of workload.
Right. These are very interesting results you are sharing. Thank you. Then I was thinking, you know this field quite well. Do you think there are still some research gaps in the field of values and value research? And what should we focus on next? Or what are you going to focus on next? Do you have some plans?
I don't know, but it's interesting to see that from different angles, they are all is coming to the same thing, which is values in action.
Right.
And it's curious because something so basic, no, and so simple. How do we act in line with our values? But imagine, from psychotherapy, ACT therapy, it's a branch of cognitive behavioral therapy, it's acceptance and commitment therapy. It's all about values. So you go to therapy, and then it's a very central and core part of to identify your values, to see where you are acting in line or not, and from sustainability research. So we know that people care about the environment, but they don't always act in line with that. A lot of research done, how can we enable people with the sustainable values, which are about harmony and universalism, also openness, to act upon them. To not just follow the trend and continue contaminating and consuming, to be more aware. And in value research, there has been very recent study published about an intervention to promote living in line with values. Value enactment was the intervention. And they compare it to mindfulness, which has already been tested so many times in relation to well-being. And this intervention which was about bringing your values to awareness and trying to find ways to live more in line, was as effective as the mindfulness.
Right.
And mindfulness can also be applied in the classroom, but this one can also be applied in classroom and by counselors.
Right.
So I think that line of research I would like to pursue.
Values in action.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds very interesting and very important too for the future to understand it better. So we come to the end of the interview, and I was still wondering, would you have any practical advice for teachers and parents and also the future teachers who might be listening to this podcast, how to kind of like embrace values, or how to find your own values and also identify them, and also how to support like young people's values to develop?
There are several questionnaires in the internet, so resources are available there of many different sorts of value questionnaires that students or your children can even fill in. Or even a parent and a child can talk together, like, what do you think about this and that? And maybe we don't ever question, like, how important is for you a world at peace, or something. And maybe it's something so simple, but something so central to life that we don't question. And starting to question it would be really nice.
Right.
But of course, no one can say like you have to teach everyone this value. All values are valuable. But it's important to at least try to know what our kids value, and the ways to support them is to make them aware of what things they value. Then you are supporting them to act on those values. And also it maybe clarifies what expectations the father have and the teacher have for their children, because maybe they think that everything is about achievement and performance and getting good grades and being great in this and that. And then educators and parents can clarify, oh no, for me it's actually more important, look, taking care of nature and helping toward the neighbor. You see, so it clarifies also expectations or values of the other people. People tend to think that the other people value less self and transcendence values, this benevolence and universalism, than people really do. We have this, mismatch.
Oh, that's very interesting. Now I know what we will talk about in the dinner table with my family tonight.
What do you value?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Florencia, for this inspiring and very interesting interview. And thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Katja. It was a very interesting experience.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.